Have you ever wondered what it's like to be in the CIA? What exactly do they do? How is it structured? What are some of the different jobs? Well, our guest today, Mick Mulroy, details to the degree that he's able his experience in the Marines and the CIA and how they shaped him, informing his pursuits after the service and the incredible humanitarian work he currently does all over the world. We also discuss his time as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, working as a policy advisor, and why veterans are uniquely skilled to make a global impact in some of the world's toughest places. This is a great one, so I hope you enjoy our conversation with Mick Mulroy. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
That's Whitefish, Montana. A
Wow.
lot of vets here. A lot of
Yeah, no
vets.
kidding.
Yep.
I've seen mountains like that in pictures, but that's incredible.
Beautiful place to
No snow here, actually.
Oh, imagine that. We have a ski resort, so we have to have snow.
You've got one nearby?
Oh yeah, it's right here.
That's your home base?
This is where we hub Lobo out of, and this is where I live, and my business partner lives. But we travel a lot. We do this humanitarian enterprise, if you will. Yeah, we keep expanding. So we're on the road a lot, way more than we, would have thought when we retired, but it's all volunteer, so no complaints.
Yeah. Self-imposed.
It is for sure.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and hop into things, but just as a preface to this conversation, our goal is to help transitioning service members by telling the stories of successful veterans that are doing great things in all facets of business and obviously humanitarian work and life post-service. And so that's kind of the premise here. You've got a very impressive background and definitely a unique perspective from a lot of guests that we've had on the show so far. So we're excited to jump into it. And I'd love to start off, we'd love to hear more about your background and your story and service and things, but I noticed that on your LinkedIn resume, you are a boxing coach, or at least you have been a boxing coach. So what's the story behind that, kind of to kick us off here?
It's the Irish martial art, as my grandfather used to say, right? And he was a boxer, and I had and my dad said, a long line of half-ass boxers, I guess. I don't know if we really were half-ass. I've got a couple of professionals in my family, but anyway, it's a family thing, right? And I grew up boxing a bit. I mean, I was, amateur. And then when I was in the Marine Corps, I had the opportunity. They needed, at the time, an officer to be not the captain of the team, the head coach, right? And it just so happened I know to box. So it got me to go to the USA boxing certification and all that stuff. So, as a guy who grew up really idolizing boxers, it was really cool. So I did it overseas quite a bit, and like in a lot of our partner forces, there was combatives. And so I taught the boxing part. We used to do smokers and they became real popular. Yeah, man, you got to keep it alive. It's a phenomenal sport. There's a lot of
as an old school boxing guy, what did you think of the Mike Tyson fight? Did you see that?
Oh, it was painful. Yeah. And my son, he boxed in high school. Actually had it in high school where he grew up, which was, Uganda. So he kind of carried on the tradition, but he watched it. I watched it. It looked like there was a lot of pulled punches up, put it that way.
Right.
And, I mean, Tyson, legendary. Hopefully he didn't have to do that expeditionary fight, that it was just a matter of what he wanted to do, not for financial purposes. And I don't know if that's the case, but I do think that Tyson could personally do, even with the bum knee, right? But there's a history of expeditionary fights, right? But I love pure boxing, and yeah, it's a great sport. It's still doing well, even with UFC, which is also a great sport.
Yeah. Well, you casually mentioned your son. You said your son grew up in Uganda. Could you tell us more about kind of your background and what sort of family, spends that much time in Uganda?
Yeah. So, I mean, I know this is a lot about the persons you're interviewing. I like one thing I don't like to do is talk a lot about myself. Just you'll figure out. Nor can I. Right? It's a twofer. It's both. I don't like to talk too much about myself, and my former employee doesn't like for me to talk too much about myself. But what I can do, since I'm all about giving veterans options for when they either decide to get out of their service or they retire, right? So I can talk about, to the extent I can, what I did, the job in the agency that's very similar to the military. I can talk about policy because, I did that after I got out of the agency. And I think veterans could be really helpful there. And then, as you already mentioned, the humanitarian enablement that my group does, which I think is really right for veterans to do, whether they either end their service or retire. The skill sets they bring to those kind of missions is unparalleled, really. There is no better, and I'm biased, but a better expeditionary military force on the planet, potentially ever, than the U.S. military. And that's what helping humanitarian situations really is. It's not the kinetic stuff. Obviously, we don't do that. It's the austere logistics. It's the extreme medical capability. It's delivering by maritime, air, ground in ways that other groups might not know is possible. But anyway, so if we could talk about that, and so my son in Uganda, right? So we went all over the world in my job, and he was there, as a dependent. And we went into one gym, not to keep this boxing thing going, but it's Dick Tiger. It was an West Coast gym. I don't know why it was called that, but it's really well known in Uganda for boxers. And so, the two white dudes walked in there. It kind of was one of those record scratch moments, like, you guys are lost. I said, nope. I heard about you guys. My son's a boxer, and they put him in the ring, focus mitts, and lo and behold, they're like, oh man, this kid knows how to box. So he ended up boxing there for a while, boxing at high school. And I almost actually talked about him going to the Commonwealth Games, right? And I was like, well, he's American. And he's like, we'll make him Ugandan. And we'll just throw him in the. It almost looked like that. This might be dating myself, but if you remember the movie The Jerk, and he was like the one white dude on the team. It was awesome.
100%.
Yeah.
I was picturing the same thing.
You're right. Yeah. He was like the jerk, big Irish head, standing in the back. But no, it's his experience. Now he was a Marine, and he's a new platoon leader at the 101st Airborne. So he's following in the vet footsteps. Super proud of him. Back then, super proud of him for being able to allow to stay at West Coast Boxing Gym, Kampala, Uganda.
Yeah.
So where's your mindset with him going Army? Because my father was also a Marine, and then I chose Army. So I think he originally had some reservations, but now he's like a huge Army fan. He's like, Army football and everything. He's gung ho.
100%, man. That's the way dads are, right? So we've got a tree. We got a lot of vets in that. It's got we don't have Air Force, so we need some Air Force, but we have.
That's all right. Leave them out.
Yeah. Army's there, several of them. Navy, my business partner, Eric Ulrich, retired SEAL from JSOC. So yeah, super. Once your kid goes into the service, and you're like in the service, it's just a thing, right? I don't have anything against the Army, of course, but Walton did 8 years in the Marine Corps. He was a reconnaissance Marine, 2.5, 3 years on active duty. So he really ended as a sergeant. Super impressed and proud of him for that. And then he always had a thing about the Rangers, man. He isn't a Ranger yet. He finished Ranger school, but he's a platoon leader, infantry officer. We'll see if he goes on to try out for 75th. He grew up a lot of people that spent time at JSOC, right? So unfortunately, Ray Car doesn't have any JSOC. That's it was hard to compete against some of my friends, special activities, because they were like, well, you want to go to JSOC?
Right.
No, Army and Navy. Well, he didn't say that's why he did it, but I think that had it.
If he decides to go the 75th Ranger Regiment route, just feel free to let me know. I'm happy to put him in touch with a number of my buddies who are commanders there, have senior roles there at this point that I served with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I could not recommend that organization more highly. It's unbelievably fulfilling and just the best people I've worked with. Jack aside, of course.
Yes, absolutely. No, I have the same feelings and impression. I wasn't in it, obviously, but we do heavily recruit from your guys' outfit, and they do exceptional in the other area that I think we're going to talk about, Special Activity Center.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear, the degree that we can discuss, the service side of your time in the Marines. and then what kind of led to the policy piece as well, kind of how your experience informed that transition into kind of the political policy sector.
Sure. So there's been a group that's always been there, right? The CIA itself came out of OSS, and there was a paramilitary component of OSS, which continued on in its direct lineage. I know its lineage also includes, Green Berets, SEALs, Rangers, I assume MARSOC, Recon, and the Marine Corps. But the direct descendants is now called Special Activities Center, right? So it's a component inside the CIA. So it falls under the authorities that the CIA have, which is Title 50. Right? So coordinate authorities to be able to do things that aren't necessarily authorized for the military. We support the military also quite a bit. That's another discussion, but essentially the Title 50 of the U.S. Code gives the agency the authority to do deniable operations. So stuff that the U.S. government can completely deny upfront, never acknowledge. It gives us a lot of ability to work with people that may not want to be closely associated with us for their own reasons. It gives us another option in our national security toolbox, right? So the motto of it is tertio optio, which is the third option. If diplomacy doesn't work, military doesn't work for whatever reason, you have another option, and that's basically Special Activities Center. As you would guess, and I guess I'm sure you guys already know, it's composed of almost entirely military people. And at one time, I think even inside the agency, they thought it was the military. Like they thought there was some military people that were assigned to them that was sitting over there that they didn't talk to until, there was a need, right? But now we have been completely intertwined with agency operations, as we should be. And the folks that come there, they come, a lot of them from JSOC units, as you guys know, CAG, Dev Group, huge presence there, as you'd expect. Big recruiting pool. Also, Whiteside SEALs, if you want to call them, Green Berets, Recon Marines, huge presence there. MARSOC now that it's, in existence. And then there's always flat out infantry guys like myself, infantry officers, both Army and Marines, but very much the minority. The majority is from the SOCOM units, and whether that's what they call PMOOs, and these are all the things I'm allowed to talk about, so I'm going to try to stay in my lane so I don't get, call from the director. But PMOs are paramilitary operations officers, and please, if you have questions, cut me off. They are mostly folks that did about 10 years in SOCOM units. They're brought in and they're a hybrid. So they go through the entire training pipeline to be an operations officer, colloquially a spy. And they go through the whole pipeline to be a paramilitary officer. So it's years, right? And the case officer stuff is about how to spot, assist, develop, recruit, run clandestine asset, and to conduct covert operation. Paramilitary is exactly what you think. It is about how to do our version of special operations that is consistent across the components of spectrum. So it's taking people with similar backgrounds, right? Take a Ranger, take a SEAL, but then teaching them the way that it's done in the Special Activities Center, which has a lot less assets, a lot fewer people, and, relies on other things other than just brute force, right? So it's not so much for those veterans that are considering it. It's hard to get in, but the training is particularly on the paramilitary side. It's about learning, right? Because they've got guys that, made it to 75th. They've already had like 15 gut checks. It's not easy, but it's all about teaching. And it's all about, like, once you're selected, they want to make sure you get through the other side. And most come out going, wow, I learned a lot. I wasn't so stressed about, getting bounced because, they tell them they're going in. I think this is about you learning, not about, us smoke checking all of you guys. There's some of that, but it's really internally driven. And then when you come out of that, you are assigned to one of the particular components of special. And most people started around. And then there's another component for the veterans that are considering this. If you are all about staying full career military, it's called, now it's called paramilitary specialists. And those are your like sergeant majors, your master chiefs, and, Delta, that group, and all the other components I mentioned. They're they finished a career, they come in and they focus almost exclusively on paramilitary. And those guys tend to be the workhorses of that part of the agency. They're the guys who stay with these paramilitary programs for long periods of time. Everybody knows them in the program. It's one of the reasons why we do partner force operations, I think, really well, is because of the consistency. And those are the two main parts of what is composed of special activities, air, ground, maritime.
Is there a particular avatar of former military person who you saw be successful or have a high acceptance rate into these sort of groups? Is it somebody who's leaving the military, but it's like, I haven't quite had the itch scratched that I got in the military to do, but I feel like this organization might be able to provide some deeper purpose or a different mission that might be more along the lines of what I'm looking for. What have you seen kind of as the trend of success there?
And that's a good question. So what I've seen with people that want to come there or that do get there is they really like the military. They really liked the brotherhood, if you will, of special operations. Perhaps they could do a little less with the bureaucracy of the military, right? We don't have a lot of oversight, and it's a small group, right? And
that was
that could be
actually
good or
one of the
bad.
things that I loved most about the military was the bureaucracy. And I had to get
Jack's
over
a red tape guy.
Yeah,
that's funny, Jack. Yeah. Just give me more bureaucracy. And we have it just so nobody gets there and it pings me later going, dude, I thought you said there was bureaucracy. There's bureaucracy, right? But there's a lot less. And 99% of the agency doesn't really know what we do. So they're kind of like, you guys do that? We go, yeah, we do that. Good luck. So it's part of that. It's a lot of what you like and not a lot of what you might not like if you don't like that. And it's basically like still being in the military, right? I mean, it is. It's just like going to a different unit. It really is in many ways. So I think that's what I see when people come in. What people that are successful, generally speaking, it's always been heavy with Green Brass, SF, because a lot of the mission's similar. You do a lot of the, UW, unconventional warfare, partner force operations. That's been the case from, North Korea, Laos, Vietnam, all the way up to, Iraq and Afghanistan. So they do, and I don't know the actual stats, but I would guess that they're very highly represented. I think people that are very comfortable without a lot of guidance do well, that you're confident enough to make your own decisions and really I know this is consistent with a lot of special operations forces, but you get along with the team, man, because you can be the most squared away gunslinger in history, but if you're going to be on a 6-man team for a year stuck in some remote place and you're an asshole, man, it just doesn't work for everybody else. And that's the same with a lot of military units, but I think it's more extreme with us just because even 6-man is a big team for us. So if you can't be the team player, and row when you're rowing and, navigate when you're navigating, it really does have a profound impact on small teams. So I think the folks that, don't take themselves too serious, can do whatever is needed, but also very comfortable in gray zones and in our case, black zones. Those are the guys, and they are mostly guys that do well. And they come out of the units where that is already something that's, admired.
I think the number one piece of advice going into even just like Ranger School, for example, the number one piece of advice was be a good dude. It's so simple, but it applies to everything. If you're just a good person who's selfless and a good, contributing member of the team, it just goes so far. And it's very simple, but it's all it takes.
Yep. And that's what your reputation will be built on, Ranger School, all that.
So if that sort of avatar spoke to somebody who's listening to the podcast, what would your recommendation be if they were interested in pursuing an organization like this, especially if they were currently active duty military, whether, Green Beret or otherwise? Is the timeline, would the timeline support doing it while active duty, or would someone need to transition from service before pursuing this option?
A good question. I want to get a lot. You can do it while on active duty. It does take a while to go through it's mostly the time is mostly the approval clearance stuff, and it could take a while. So you don't necessarily want to get out and not have a job, right? Waiting for this, you get these weird calls in the middle of nowhere with, the phone blocked and all that stuff. And you never know when it's coming. So I would suggest a couple of things for people that are interested. First of all, it's officer enlistment. I mean, probably already knew that, but we take both into both sides of the aisle, both PMOs and the PM specialists. I would say that there's probably more O's in the PMOs and more enlisted in the specialists just because what they do, skill set wise, but both are welcome and highly sought after. If you have those skill sets, right? So if it's any of those units that we mentioned, and language is always good too. It just is good in general for the agency. It's not required. A bachelor's degree is required to be a staffer at the agency, period. It's not that Special Activities Center can't wait. I mean, we've made the argument like half these dudes have PhDs in warfighting. We don't care, if they got a degree in English lit. You know what I mean? But, the agency being the agency, they do.
Bureaucracy.
Yeah, bureaucracy. There you go. They will look at the requirements that, yes, the whole agency has to have, and then they'll look at experience, what you've done, the skill sets. They do not only intellectual tests, and they're not looking for geniuses, but they also do emotional intelligence tests. Goes to the whole point of whether you can play well with others. But I would say don't wait till you're retired. If you have an idea when you want to get out, that helps you time it. Even if they accept you, they do realize, especially us, that almost everybody we have, if not everybody's coming out of the military. We have to work with when your separation date is, when your retirement date is. They'll work with that. A couple other things I'd say, if you apply early and you get rejected, don't just write it off. Don't just write it off. A lot of people don't get it on their first shot. It could be anything from there just wasn't any slots at the time you applied and it had nothing to do with your qualifications to they just think you needed some more time and experience. Hopefully they tell you that, but it shouldn't be like, oh, I tried. They said no. I guess, the magic guy behind the curtain said didn't make the cut. If they tell you, hey, we need you more experience in the military, do it. Try again. If they want some other kind of experience, and sometimes they do, they tell you, give it a shot and come back. Don't view it as failure, period. And don't view it as final. I would say a lot of the people that I know that do really well didn't get in their first opportunity.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people would view an organization that's so kind of authoritative or so official in that sort of sense and think that that's like a final say, but that's really, really helpful advice. Like anything else, don't take no until it's a firm brick wall. That's great. And thanks for being willing to share that. Due to my time in the 75th Ranger Regiment, I feel like I had a little more proximity to that world than I would have in the rest of the Army, but I feel like 99.9% of the Army and maybe the military in general probably just has no awareness of what is possible or what exists out there. So this is super helpful.
Yeah. And it, obviously that came to light in the GWAT because all of our units were like this, right? Subject of all the JSOC were hand in glove. And now that we've left that and everybody's going back to their own corners, if you will, we're going to lose a lot of that. The ability to work together, which I think was one of the more effective parts of the GWAT, quite frankly. Hopefully and we do that here. We do some training. We have a retired Delta Sergeant Major right down the street runs our training here. So you don't need to tell him anything. But we're trying to keep that together. Like we're saying, hey, you guys, like we got those guys coming out. We got you guys coming out. Can we do some part of this training where it's combined? So we don't lose like all of the lessons learned the last 20 years to the next one. And usually they go, yeah, okay. We want to focus on our own training, but yes, let's have a component in the, at the exercise at the end that touches. Right. And I think that's really helpful. It's one of the things hopefully that we're doing for the community that they'll find about.
If someone did make the transition, what would they expect as far as geography and family wise? Could you just touch on maybe the first couple years of the transition, what it would look like for them? And I mean, of course, I think people have this idea of what life would be like in that sort of organization, but you clearly have the bona fide experience.
Yes, I can do that, Jack, at least as much as I can talk about it. So if you look at the PMOO, right, the Paramilitary Operations Officer, that full-time person, they're required to do the whole training as an ops officer. So that takes a long time, multiple different places. And then you go through the paramilitary training. Also takes a long time, but you're mostly you're with your class of PMOs and PM specialists. And you're traveling the country doing that. Very extensive. Everybody that I've talked to when I went through comes out going, wow, I really learned a lot. And really helpful. So the first assignment for a PMOO is usually in ground, right? It's kind of like you earn your stripes there. It's the biggest component personnel wise. And you go on a team and you see whether you fit, right? If you fit, you'll stay there for many years. You do what we do all around the world. There is a part of, because like I said, you're a hybrid. So you're the PM guy, you're the OO. They will, after you've kind of made your way in the paramilitary world, they'll want you to go out and do what we call a traditional tour. The agency just calls tours, but special activities are traditional. So you prove that you can actually be an OO. Cocktail parties, pinky up, all that kind of stuff, and not, be the guy wearing the chloroforms at the cocktail party or some crap like that, right? You got to be able to do both. You got to be able to be the guy that can plan an operation and participate in it, and then you got to be the guy that can walk into a cocktail party and hit up a Japanese businessman or a Russian physicist. So it's kind of, in many ways, you got to be a chameleon. And you got to blend in, right? So you can't go in there and just start woofing about, no shit, there was knee deep in hand grenades. And people go, okay, this is a military guy, right? You got to have the ability to be many different things, right? And then you have to prove yourself. So you have to prove yourself twice. You have to prove yourself as a PM. You have to prove yourself as we used to be called a case officer. Then you come back to the center and you'd go up as you would expect in management. And then for PMOs, they become chiefs of bases, potentially chiefs of station. That's expanding, and they'll have all sorts of disciplines inside the agency under you. And then most people try to always come back to that center. They used to be called branches, just so people are tracking because they're used to names of ground branch. They got so much bigger during the GWOT that they're all department. So it got going from a battalion to something like that. Not near the same size. I'm just trying to comparison wise and the small scale that is. And then Jack, on the PM specialist side, like I said, those guys, they don't have to relocate necessarily. So a lot of them live in places like, Montana, where I live. They live where they want to, and they do train and they do deploy, but they don't have to be tethered to DC, which is a big benefit for those people that don't like living in DC. For the PMOs, they are in many ways centered out of DC, but also overseas. One more thing on that is a lot of families really like when they get deployed to do the traditional, right? They go from not seeing their father in most cases that much to coming home every day. We live in overseas. We're not geographically tied. You could be in Paris, you could be in Nairobi, you could be, in Jakarta. And so it's a good break for the families because we work hard overseas, but generally speaking, you're home. The kids get to live overseas and get an experience that not a whole lot of kids get. And I think it's really popular among them.
So the other tour, the non-traditional tours, if you will, it's an unaccompanied, very much, separated from family kind of lifestyle while you're, until you do the traditional tour.
That's right. So it is similar to the military. At first it was like you're going until the end, and then we realized the end wasn't coming anytime soon. And then we finally got on and this happened all the time. He's very consistent. You're on a team, you have a green, gold type scenario, and when you're gone and when you're back. So it is, I think, normalized a long time ago, normalized for the operators. And there's better ways to keep in touch with used to be like zero way to keep in touch. Now they figure it out. So at first, for the years that you're doing that, you'll be gone. Obviously, your family's not going to places where we're going, but you will have a consistent, time at home for sure. And they try to make it so it's conducive. Bam.
Got it. That's super helpful. Well, transitioning a little bit to the kind of policy side, you mentioned at the beginning that your experience there and kind of your take on that world, that there probably could be or should be more veterans in that space. Could you talk to what took you that direction, and then how you think someone who's like, I got out of the military because I'm not trying to do more of the same type of stuff, but politics and advising and policy and that sort of stuff does interest me. What could they be doing? What kind of routes should they be considering?
Absolutely. And also look at I was obviously in the policy side, not the politics side, but I'll touch on both. I, like a lot of us, man, who's making policy up there? Have they ever been here? Is it just, they just essentially bounced around internal to DC and had to fancy pants schools, which nothing against fancy pants schools, but did they actually spend time on the ground? Did they know people that live here? And did they really know how difficult some of these policies decisions they're making either won't work or make things worse, right? I'm sure you've thought that yourself, and I'm sure guys in the unit, they kind of like, what? So I was kind of the dog that caught the car, if only. And then, I was literally retired from the agency. I was going to drive out to Montana. My business partner was 2 years behind me he was finishing up his time. So I didn't really know what I was going to do until he got done. And then I got a call from Secretary Mattis's chief of staff. And I don't know him well. I know him better now, obviously. I knew him then. And he basically told me he was looking for people who had served that weren't political and that he would want to put in positions to help influence policy in the region. And so he was told I fit the bill, right? And a lot of people fit the bill. It wasn't like I need Mick Mulroy. It was more like I need the guy who spent a lot of time in the Middle East and knows how difficult it is. So somebody gave him my name. So I was like, hey, how long do I have to decide? Of course, the chief of staff's like, well, you're a Marine, so I didn't really figure it would take this long. I was like, oh. Right, I'll turn around. I'll go back to DC. And I did. And then I retired on my birthday, actually. And the guy said, when can you start? I said, well, my birthday's today, so I'm retiring. And I guess I can start after that. And he said, cool, you'll start the next day. Show up. Congratulations, click. So that's how it started for me. And I don't want to make it certainly not about me, because anybody with the experience I had, I think would have been value added in this role. And I really do think, and I understand why guys like, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm a war fighter, and I get it. I do. But unfortunately, if we all have that mentality, then we're going to have few people in positions to influence policy that have a direct impact on all of us, right? In the next generations of Rangers, Marines, SEALs, and such. So if you have an opportunity, I would strongly suggest you take it. It might not be fun. It's got its own version of slog, DC. You do bump up against politics a lot, but the experience you have, the knowledge you have to bring, and don't expect you to be like God's gift to policymakers. They all have their own expertise. But I do think it's very valuable to have somebody that can talk about the consequences of lofty decisions in DC. Right. And I agree. And I think that's the case for politics too. I just don't have an interest in it personally, but people that do, that have the same thing. I mean, whether you're on the left, on the right, on the center, I think their politics and policy is better off for the input of veterans, which for a long time wasn't the case. We're seeing a change in that on the politics side, which is good. But we also need it on the policy side, because the policy side actually makes more decisions that have impact, whether it's in the Pentagon, the State Department, or the NSC at the White House. Whether you're active duty, go there, or whether you get out and you can apply for some of these, please consider it. It's important.
Practically, someone wants to go onto the policy side. What's kind of some steps they could take? Or I know that's a very broad question. There's infinite possibilities, but based off your experience, where do you think people with our sort of backgrounds would be a fit or value added as their kind of first couple steps after the military?
Good question. So where I've seen, I kind of just came out of the blue, but ones that I've seen that's actually planned it. If you're doing a advanced degree, master's, obviously something in international affairs, global affairs, security, national security, and doing an intern in some of the think tanks in DC, right? The way it works is, you have think tanks that are aligned with the Republican Party, think tanks that are aligned with the Democratic Party. When either party's out of power, right, they're not in the White House, they tend to gravitate back to the think tanks, right? And then they wait for their side to win the presidency again. And then you see the shifts like this, right? And it's not a bad thing, right? They get experience. They start at, senior levels, but lower senior levels. And then they go back to the think tank, and then they come in here, and then they go back to the think tank, and they come in here, or an academic institute. So I would suggest that, and they do take military, what do they call them? Not interns, but fellowships at most of these think tanks. Getting that, if you want to get into policy, is very valuable. You'll be in the community almost immediately. You'll be going to all these meetings. You'll be sitting in the back. Also, if you can get detailed into the OSD, Office of Secretary of Defense, they're civilians and they're political appointees. Not all of them. Some of them are career policy people, and they're really important. but they also take junior officers to go and be assigned because they have a lot of military questions, and not all these civilians know, all the questions about the, military capability and capacity. So I would say do that. And then when you get a chance, apply for White House fellowships, apply to be at the NSC, which is the hub of all interagency policy discussion, right? It's the Defense Department, it's the State Department, it's the agency, it's Treasury, everything, Homeland Security, FBI. So there's plenty of ways where we're already involved, and those ways would lead to potentially a second career.
What revved your engine back up when you're making kind of a career transition into policy? Of course, I'm sure the job itself, just like giving back and providing your expertise for a greater cause, but like what for you specifically interested you in that job, and why did you pursue it outside of just the fact that it was a great position? And
I couldn't turn it down, right?
right.
Yeah. He gave a talk to my son, and he was like, well, it's General Mattis, right? I mean, you've already told him this, right? And he is exactly what I think, people think he is. He's incredible and so stoic, actually. But so what I would say, and maybe this is not cheating, but I've gravitated to what I thought I could be more helpful in. So it was conflicts in the Middle East. I didn't know a lot of the energy policy that goes with, Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar were in my responsibility, but I did gravitate toward, okay, I think I'm here because I spent a lot of time in conflict zones. That's what I'm going to focus on. So I did focused on Syria, focused on Yemen, obviously the maximum pressure campaign with Iran, all that. And I think I was, hopefully, if I was helpful at all, I was helpful in that areas. And then I caught up. I had to be a quick study in areas where I wasn't, as up to speed, right? So somebody coming into the policy community on the Middle East would have been not just talking smart about the conflict in Yemen at the time. They'd also know very much about what the U.S. wants out of energy policy with Saudi Arabia, right? That wasn't something I was an expert at. So you do get an advantage by spending a lot of time, even as a military person, in the policy circles, because they don't just talk military stuff. It's just one component, right? Economics, energy, diplomacy, all that is just as important. So I had to catch up on that front. And that's why I said the career policy people at the Pentagon, but also at the State Department, are incredibly critical. People say, oh, they're bureaucrats. No, they're super trained, qualified, knowledgeable people that help keep U.S. foreign policy consistent. Because if we're not consistent, we have no strategy. You can't have an inconsistent strategy, or it's just not a strategy, right? Even if you have to adjust. So those folks really help keep a lot of our foreign policy consistent, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. So it's really helped. But for me, I focused on what I thought I could do, and I learned the rest, and I hopefully had the impact.
And was it your time in that world that kind of opened your eyes to the humanitarian need as well, or had you been involved there from the beginning? Was that kind of something that was, a thread that was being pulled all along?
So my business partner already referenced, Eric Ulrich. He and I worked in Afghanistan, and we worked in Somalia together. It was in Somalia where he and I started talking about starting a group when we retired. So that would have been 2012, I think. But anyway, we talked about it there, about the need that these endless wars were just going to keep going. And every time we went out to the battle space, the fighters we were fighting against seemed to get younger and younger. So we did two things. We did a totally amateur documentary on child soldiers. In other words, we filmed it with our iPhones and GoPros. A lot of folks that served in the counter LRA mission, Observant Compass operation, will know the person that we did the documentary on, Anthony Opoka, former child soldier, abducted, went on to be Joseph Kony's radio operator that worked really close with us in the counter LRA mission. So we did a documentary on him. His human story is just incredible. That led to a book being written. That book by a best-selling author funded our NGO. And then we wanted the whole time to try to take, skills we learned in the military, bring in more vets, and then do more in the humanitarian space. The efficiency, it's I'm biased, as I assume you guys are too, about the U.S. military, but it was just clear to us that taking a logistician from the military and inserting him in a humanitarian operation alone would have a profound effect on it. And we've been told this by humanitarians too. So it isn't just our fluffing ourselves up. We've been told by humanitarians, like, actually, I went to Harvard, Kennedy School, got my master's, don't know anything about logistics. I'm now in charge of logistics for this entire country. And your guy that did 4 years as an Army logistics officer could run circles because they never got trained, right? I'm just using that as an example. And of course, we don't go in there going, well, you know how to do your job. We're going, well, this is because we're trained in it. So let's enable you guys who have gotten the long-term connections, the legitimacy, and the drive, because there are really great people out there doing this stuff. We just come in and help where we can, whether it's airdrops that don't blow up when they hit the ground, or whether it's maritime. We did the maritime corridor into Gaza. And now we're looking at Syria. We're looking at Lebanon. We're funded by an NGO, but it's partly what they want us to do. And it's partly what we can do, and whether we're going to be value added or redundant. If we're redundant, then we don't really need to be there. If we're going to be value added, we're all about it. And I think we're not only making headway, but we really want to turn our efforts into an option for veterans. It doesn't have to be with us. Lobo Institute is where I am. And Fogbow is a company that is really leading the effort on vets and humanitarian operations. But it could be any company. You could start your own company, because there's not going to be too many people trying to help people around the world. And I really do think the need is out there for vets.
Did you guys start from scratch, or did you kind of latch on to a bigger organization and kind of speak to a little bit more specifically how you started this? And of course, you have a ton of experience and I'm sure tons of contacts to be able to get the ball rolling. But what did you do to actually start this and get it going?
So, Jack, I got to admit, when we first came up with our business, I don't even know what they call it, plan, and we briefed a lot of former guys that had gone out and got MBAs and stuff. So they're like, this is not a business plan. You can do all this for Montana? Yep, we're going to do all for Montana. You do humanitarian operations around the world? Yep. And who's going to fund it? I don't know. They're like, I'm trying to be polite here, boys, but you guys, I don't know if this plan's going to work. Right. And they were just being honest. So, there was no guarantee at first. What we did to start, one, we got a bunch of like-minded people. If you want to present yourself as being able to do something, you actually have a team to do it, even if you don't have an employer yet. Right. So I would suggest that you find people that are willing to put themselves out there, their skill set, without necessarily a knowledge of whether it'll work. Right. So we started taking projects. We worked for the UN in Yemen. Lobo Institute did. We worked for the State Department in Afghanistan after withdrawal. We did a lot of, as you probably know, a lot of guys did a lot of volunteer work, but that transitioned to official programs at the State Department. And then this other company, and we did more than that. We'd work on the child soldier issue quite a bit, but it was going from project to project. And then we had the luck of a group called Fogbow, which are, a lot of them are former military, but they've gone out and done great in business. So they had money, they had funding and capital to go behind it, and that really supercharges. So we have done most of our work through them. And there's an international foundation called the Maritime Humanitarian Aid Foundation that is also, they can fund whoever they want, but they do fund us quite a bit. So that took us from a concept that a lot of people didn't understand how it was going to work, to where we're fully, and hopefully it just keeps going and growing, and we'll keep adding more vets that are getting out and really turn this into something that's a viable option for a vet.
I think a mutual contact said you were recently in South Sudan. Is that true?
Yes, we were. And yeah. South Sudan, man. I've been there many times. So we're a little coy on what we're doing in South Sudan simply because there's political issues.
Yeah.
Not with us at all, but it's a tense situation in which you have to get multiple sides to agree to do anything.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Like a lot of the conflicts.
Yeah.
Right. So we were asked by a incredible NGO, who remain English for now, to help them using our military skill sets. They are exceptional. They're everywhere, and they have all the connections and expertise, except for these military skill sets, as they apply to this humanitarian effort. So we went in to do that, and we were really privileged to do that. And I think we did a lot of good. And I think when it's approved to talk about, I'd be happy to come back out and talk about it, because your audience would say, oh yeah, I can see why they would want you to do this. It had to do with air deliveries, but it's something that, especially people that do that in the military, they've done everything possible. They've dropped just about everything out of a plane. They figured out how to do it successfully. And it's just taken that massive amount of experience and just applying it directly to something that makes huge difference. Like, people were going to starve. It wasn't going to happen, but I'll say that as much. And you can just see how it had an impact. And yeah, that's what it was
If you need an OE254 dropped in, I got you. I know how to rig that, and I know how to put it on my side and get it in.
Yeah.
How generous of you, Jack.
These skills that you guys have, I'm telling you, I mean, you know that they're substantial, but when you see them applied to another area, you're like, wow. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
you know, a touchdown is a different experience now, right?
That's right.
You know, jackpot, touchdown, all that stuff. We still use the terms. You probably should come up with something, but it's a different result. It's a way different. So, and it's really good to see it, but it's the same skill sets. And operational planning. It's kind of surprising how you take, you know, your very junior soldier, right, and how they could plan a patrol, which isn't much different than planning an operation, which isn't much different than planning a campaign necessarily, right? And then you look at other organizations who just don't have that level of planning. They don't even have a concept of it. It's kind of surprising. Even that is something I think we bring to the table that is recognized.
Yeah, that's something you hinted at the beginning of the podcast, and it's something we tried to make evident through these recordings is people don't always realize that they have these skills coming out of the military. They think, oh, I was an infantry officer. I don't know how to translate that, but there's so much if you really sit down and look at how it translates to really anything you're getting into. But, you know, just because you're not a logistics officer doesn't mean you don't have more logistics brain power than what a lot of people outside of the military just won't be exposed to, because they're sitting doing their job and they're not really thinking about the other things that you have to think about in the military. So that's a great point that we always want people to realize, like, you probably have more on your resume than you think you do. And even if it's a skill that you might not be able to translate onto your resume, that thought process, that way to think about operations is really beneficial to whatever you're trying to get into.
Totally agree. And we only have one logs officer. He worked for the Marine Corps and obviously the special operations, but most of them are operator, right? They're CLs and MARSOC guys, paramilitary. So to your point, the ability, leadership for one thing, which is different nowadays than it used to be in the civil society, and the ability to plan, just a flat out plan, and to take in contingencies and to know things go wrong. So you got to have a plan, but you got to be able to adjust out the plan, and you got to be able to do crisis action planning and all that stuff, their version of a crisis. All that stuff comes into play. So we're not looking just for logistics folks. We are predominantly, you know, you're the folks that, you know, are in special operation, but our skill set now is not that, but a lot of what you've learned does translate.
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to travel to do some work in South Sudan back in 2013 for a few weeks. My wife actually works for the group that I went with. She has worked for that group for about 5 or so years now, and they continue to go back in quite regularly. So I have a very special place in my heart for South Sudan, particularly northern part of the, you know, the kind of closer to the border, where you probably have gotten very familiar with as well.
Yep, absolutely. Been a lot of time.
Well, if someone was like, a lot of people say when they get out of the military, one of the biggest struggles is finding purpose, really reconnecting with a deep purpose, a deep cause, having camaraderie, adventure. All of those boxes are checked in doing the work that you're talking about. So could you just a little bit, we don't have to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but a little more specifically talk about what, if someone wanted to get involved with Fogbow or Lobo, you know, whatever direction they go, what it would look like for them on, you know, practically? Because I'm sure there's comms, there's logistics, of course, there's strategic planning and other things. So what would be a helpful skill set or helpful thing from someone who wants to get involved in this work?
So starting the first part. Yeah, I think, you know, we have a lot of problems with veterans and depression and even suicide, right? Serious problem. I'm no psychologist, psychiatrist. I do think part of the problems is you go from being in such a tight-knit organization, your team, it's family, it's actually a family. It's not just what everybody says when they talk about their work, being a family. And then they retire to places where they're somewhat isolated, I'm sitting in Montana, right? And it seems to be very common, guys, I'm going to move to a mountaintop and I'm going to have my own place and I'm going to have a bunker. And I know a lot of guys like, and it's fine, if they want to do, that's what they get into. But the problem is when they become isolated socially from their tribe, right? We are designed to be in a tribe, I mean, like it or not. I think that's a problem. I do think, we do it around here. Eric's really good at it. He just goes find these guys and say, we're going to have a bet together at the local saloon. You're coming. And if you don't come, we'll discuss it out later out. And they're like, crap. And then they go down there and they like it, right? They like it. They see everybody and all of a sudden they're back in the, in their happy space. But you got to go get guys that has pulled out of that, for their own good, right? And in our group, that's one of the things we hear. When they get there, like, oh, this is kind of like what it used to be. I'm on a team, I'm getting ribbed by the other guy. We're traveling together and we're doing stuff that matters, stuff that really matters. So I think it's a combination of being with the people that you're most comfortable with, and also doing something that matters. Like you want to tell your kids, what did you do today? Why don't you want food to people that were starving? That's something you want to tell them. So I think there is an element to that. People that are interested. So the skill sets, again, you don't have to have a specific skill set. You don't have to be a logistics officer. Again, we take in mostly people that, quite frankly, we in all the units we mentioned. So all the units that are getting an SAC, we're pulling out of there, right? So now we're never going to be in competition with SAC, but we are expanding. And we expand, we bring on more people. And it's funded. So it's not a volunteer thing. It's, it is a career. So if you're talking to your wife, it's not like, okay, I'm never going to see it. You're still not going to pay the rent. Right. So it is fully funded and it is a job. But if people are interested, info@fogbow.ch, I think or certainly go to website. You can go to the Lobo website too, but the faster if you're interested in this is Fogbow. And then we keep a repository of resumes. We try to talk to everybody that we can, but we don't know when the next project is going to come. And when it comes, it could be we hire 10 people at once. We don't want to give people false hope. We move from project to project, but it looks like we're expanding pretty substantially.
And I'm sure it's project dependent, but that would look like, you get a notice like for the next month or so you're involved and going to be gone, and you kind of spin up through that cycle. Is that kind of typically what it looks like? They're going to be gone. There's probably going to be minimal communication, but then you come back and then you're kind of waiting till the next project.
So the communication should be continuous. I mean, now anywhere in the world, and we bring our own communications package. So being able to talk to your family and stuff is not it. And we are all, for the most part, we're all retirees. So we realize that guys don't want to necessarily join us and then be going all the time. So we balance that. There's multiple different things. It could be that you come on for the project or that you come on full time, which means when you're back, you're doing stuff to find the next project. There's options. And it's not like a long-term TDY. We try to balance, having guys switch out. The other thing, and sometimes we're not in the worst places. We're in decent places that are near bad places, right? I'll just, use Israel, for example. We spend a lot of time in Israel because we do stuff in Gaza, right? So we don't have a problem with somebody bringing their spouse, right? So at your expense, but your wife might want to go to Jerusalem. Mine does, for sure. So obviously you're there to do a job, but we try to be as amenable as possible to family. And we've had people bring their college age kids out and actually have an education about what's going on in Gaza, not take them into Gaza, but in Israel, right? And so we could do that in other places too. So just know that it's not just about getting you on board and then chewing you up. It is all about working together to find something that works and then have the most impact on the ground. It's ever growing humanitarian effort. Because it is substantial.
Bringing it a little bit back to the veterans transitioning out. One thing we ask every guest, we ask a two-part question. One ask from our audience that can provide value for you, and then one give. It can be as simple as a piece of advice or something that's going to provide value for the audience.
So ask. I mean, I guess it's two-way, but if you're interested in this, please reach out to us. Whether it's Fogbow. If you're interested in the issue of child soldiers, I know a lot of my vets are because they've seen them in battlefields all around the world. We do a lot for that. We fund groups that rehabilitate kids all around the world. So if you're interested in that, And Child Soldiering is the name of that NGO. and you can just Google it, and there's a contact form. And Fogbow, there's a link that can give you the ability to reach out, touch it. But that's a two-way street, I guess. And then if it was something specifically me asking other than that, it'd be consider these. You know, if you're going to stay in the military, great. The military is a phenomenal place to do a career. You know, I come from we talked about my son, my brother-in-law, just about all my friends. Stay in if you want to stay in. You know, if you do want to look at something else, look at SAC. It's essentially like being in the military, and it's unique, but it's unique in many ways. And then when it comes to policy, we need your voice. I'm not saying it's a lot of fun. I'm not saying that because I'll get people call me and saying this ain't no fun, but it is very needed. It's very needed. And remember, when you get there, you come from a family, and the family doesn't have an R or D. I know you might be politicians, so you have to line with one or the other, but just keep in mind that I would suggest humbly, when you're dealing with other veterans, remember they're a veteran. And that's probably more important, at least it is to me, than any red or blue. And then the policy side, remember that you represent, I think, that nonpartisan view of policy. That's what the military is known for. That's what you should bring in to the policy community. The U.S. needs to have a national policy better for the United States. It isn't all about domestic political posturing.
Mhm.
That's mine. I'll go.
No, that's well said. Very well said. Appreciate that. Well, Mick, thanks again for taking the time to do this. This has been fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of value from this, and we'll of course link to reach out to your organization to learn more about what you're talking about in the show notes here, so people can link directly. But thanks again for taking the time to.
Fantastic. I appreciate you guys taking the time. And when there's some things that we'll be allowed to talk about, you know, if you guys want to readdress this, I can bring in more of my folks that can really talk about the operational details of how we made this work. And I think that might even get more people interested, because it's like solving a puzzle every time we go out there.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.